The foot in the door technique. Have you ever noticed how sometimes people can get you to agree to something small, like signing a petition, and then later, without even realizing it, you find yourself agreeing to a much bigger request? That, my friends, is the classic foot in the door technique, and it's one of the most fascinating psychological tricks in social influence, persuasion, and everyday human interaction. The core idea is simple. Once someone says yes to a small request, they are much more likely to say yes to a larger request later on, and this isn't just anecdotal, it's been studied extensively in psychology and behavioral science. Researchers have found that this phenomenon works because of a principle called consistency. People have a strong internal desire to appear consistent in their actions and beliefs, so once they commit to something, even if it's minor, they subconsciously want to stay consistent with that choice in the future. Think about it for a second. If someone asks you to put a small sticker on your car supporting a local charity, and you agree, later they might ask you to donate a small amount of money. Because you already agreed to support them in a small way, your mind feels a natural pull to continue that behavior. It's like saying, I'm the kind of person who supports this cause, and your brain wants to maintain that identity. The fascinating part is that this trick works across so many areas of life, from sales and marketing to politics and even everyday interactions with friends and family. In sales, for instance, a classic example would be a door-to-door salesperson who first asks you to answer a short survey about your preferences. Because you agreed to something so minor, they can then follow up with an actual purchase request, like buying a magazine subscription or signing up for a product trial, and you're far more likely to say yes than if they had asked for the big commitment right away. The technique also taps into subtle emotional mechanisms. When you say yes to a small request, it triggers a feeling of self-affirmation and satisfaction. You feel good about being cooperative, helpful, or consistent with your values. That positive emotional feedback makes your brain more receptive to subsequent requests, which is why this technique can be so powerful and, honestly, a little sneaky if someone knows how to exploit it. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The effectiveness of the foot in the door technique isn't just about the size of the initial request. It's also about timing and context. If the initial request is too trivial or seems irrelevant, it might not have the same effect. Likewise, if too much time passes between the small request and the larger one, the psychological consistency link can weaken. This is why marketers and social influencers often carefully craft sequences of small, easy-to-agree-to actions before introducing a bigger ask. For example, think about online subscription models where first you're asked to create a free account, then maybe to follow a few social media channels, and later to subscribe to a premium plan. Each step is small, and each step builds a sense of commitment, making the final request feel natural rather than forced. Interestingly, this technique doesn't just manipulate behavior, it also affects how people perceive themselves. Studies have shown that when individuals agree to a small request, they start to adjust their self-concept. If you put a sticker on your laptop that supports environmental causes, you begin to think of yourself as someone who cares about the environment, which makes you more likely to engage in future pro-environmental actions, like donating to a charity or participating in a cleanup drive. That's the subtle genius of the foot in the door trick. It works because it aligns external behavior with internal self-perception. And it's not limited to adults. This technique works across age groups. Children, teenagers, and adults all respond to gradual requests because we all share that same psychological desire for consistency. However, the key is that the initial request must feel voluntary. If someone feels forced or pressured, the effect can backfire, leading to resistance instead of compliance. So, this technique walks a fine line between influence and coercion, which is why ethical use is so important. Another interesting aspect is how cultural factors influence its effectiveness. In individualistic cultures, where personal autonomy and choice are highly valued, people might be more resistant to subtle persuasion if they perceive it as manipulation. In collectivist cultures, however, where social harmony and cooperation are emphasized, the technique can be even more effective because agreeing to small requests aligns with the cultural expectation of helping others and maintaining group cohesion. But let's not forget the science behind it. Decades of psychological research, starting with the classic experiments by Friedman and Fraser in 1966, have consistently shown that compliance with small requests significantly increases the likelihood of compliance with larger requests later. In their study, homeowners who agreed to a small sign in their window supporting safe driving were far more likely to later agree to place a much larger and more obtrusive billboard on their lawn. This experiment highlighted that human behavior is not just about logic and rational decision-making. It's deeply influenced by psychological patterns and social norms. And the kicker? You can actually use this technique in your everyday life for positive influence. Want to encourage a friend to adopt healthier habits? Start small, maybe suggest a short walk together rather than a full-blown fitness challenge. Want your team at school or work to contribute to a project? Start with tiny, easy-to-complete tasks to get them engaged and invested before asking for bigger contributions. Understanding the foot-in-the-door technique is like having a secret key to influence, but remember, it's powerful because it works subtly. It doesn't force someone. It simply guides them to a decision that aligns with their previous choices and self-image. That's why it's considered one of the most effective psychological tricks in human behavior. It leverages the natural desire for consistency, taps into emotional reinforcement, and influences self-perception, all while feeling completely natural to the person being influenced. So next time you find yourself agreeing to something small, pay attention. You might just be stepping onto a path that leads to bigger commitments, all because your brain loves being consistent and seeing itself as reliable and helpful. And that, in a nutshell, is the fascinating power of the foot-in-the-door technique. A simple but profoundly effective way that our minds can be influenced in subtle ways that we often don't even notice. The door-in-the-face technique. Have you ever noticed how sometimes someone will make a huge, seemingly outrageous request, and when you say no, they immediately follow up with a smaller, more reasonable request that you actually agree to? That's called the door-in-the-face technique, and it's one of the most clever psychological strategies used in persuasion, negotiation, and even everyday interactions, working on a principle that's almost the opposite of the foot-in-the-door technique but equally fascinating. Essentially, the idea is that when a person initially presents an extreme request, you instinctively feel the urge to reject it because it's too big, too demanding, or simply unrealistic. But this rejection is psychologically important because it sets the stage for the real goal, which is the second, smaller request. Here's why it works. The door-in-the-face technique taps into the principle of reciprocity, one of the most fundamental social norms in human behavior. When someone makes a concession by moving from a large request to a smaller one, your brain subconsciously feels obliged to reciprocate by agreeing to that smaller request, almost as a way of saying, okay, you've compromised, so I'll compromise too. It's like a psychological dance where one side makes the first move, and the other side follows, but often without even realizing it. Classic studies in social psychology illustrate this perfectly. In one famous experiment, researchers asked college students to volunteer to take a group of juvenile delinquents on a 2-hour trip to the zoo, a request most students naturally refused because it was too demanding. Immediately after, the experimenters asked them to take a smaller, more manageable request. Accompany a single juvenile delinquent to a 1-hour session once a week for 2 years. Interestingly, a significantly higher number of students agreed to the second, smaller request than if they had been asked without the initial outrageous request. This shows that the initial door-in-the-face request created a sense of obligation and social pressure, which then increase compliance with the subsequent, realistic request. What's particularly fascinating is that this technique works not because people are being manipulated in a conscious way, but because it leverages deep-seated social norms and emotional responses. We are inherently social creatures, and from a very young age, we learn the importance of fairness, reciprocity, and compromise. So when someone makes a concession, our brain reacts almost automatically with a desire to reciprocate. In real life, this trick can be seen everywhere, from charity appeals to marketing strategies to personal negotiations. For example, imagine you're trying to get a friend to help you move to a new apartment. You might jokingly ask them to help you move all your furniture across the city on a Saturday morning, knowing they will probably refuse. Then, you follow up with a smaller request, just helping you carry a couple of boxes or picking up a few items from the store, and they're much more likely to say yes. The key, however, is timing and credibility. The initial request must be obviously larger than what you actually want, but not so ridiculous that it damages your credibility or makes the person feel manipulated. If it's too absurd, people might just tune out or resent you, which ruins the effect entirely. Another interesting aspect of the door-in-the-face technique is how it interacts with self-perception and social identity. When people agree to the smaller request after rejecting the larger one, they often justify their compliance in a way that maintains their self-image. They might think, "I said no to that huge request, but this smaller one is reasonable, and helping is consistent with my values." In other words, the technique not only influences behavior but also allows the person to feel good about their choice, making compliance feel voluntary rather than coerced. And just like many psychological tricks, cultural and situational factors play a role in how effective it is. In collectivist societies where harmony and cooperation are highly valued, people may be even more responsive to concessions because refusing a reasonable request after someone has already compromised can feel socially uncomfortable. Conversely, in cultures that highly value independence, people may be more resistant unless the initial request is carefully framed. What's also amazing is how subtle variations of this technique can work even in digital environments. Online sales, for instance, often use a form of the door-in-the-face method. A website might first offer a very high-priced subscription or package that most users reject, and immediately afterward present a more moderately priced option. Because users have already mentally processed the initial rejection, the second option feels much more reasonable and attainable, increasing the likelihood of purchase. It's almost like your brain is saying, "Well, I wasn't going to spend that much, but this seems fair by comparison." Emotional and cognitive mechanisms further enhance this effect. Humans are wired to respond to social negotiation cues. When someone makes a concession, it triggers a sense of relief and gratitude, which primes your mind to respond positively. Essentially, the first no primes you for a future yes, and the whole interaction feels natural, almost intuitive. The door-in-the-face technique also highlights the importance of perceived fairness. If the initial request feels like it's a genuine attempt to ask for help, rather than a manipulative ploy, people are far more likely to comply with the subsequent request. This is why experienced negotiators, fundraisers, and marketers carefully frame their initial requests. The first ask must be large enough to make the second request seem reasonable, but not so large that it appears absurd or insincere. Interestingly, this technique can even be used to improve communication and collaboration in group settings. For example, in team projects, asking for a larger commitment up front, like taking on multiple responsibilities, can be followed by a more manageable request, which team members are more likely to agree to. This creates a sense of cooperation and alignment without forcing anyone, fostering better group dynamics. The scientific basis of the door-in-the-face technique is robust. It combines social norms, reciprocity, commitment, and self-perception, showing that human behavior is rarely purely rational. Instead, we are influenced by subtle social cues, the perception of fairness, and our own desire to appear consistent and cooperative. And the practical applications are endless. From parents encouraging children to adopt positive habits to leaders motivating teams, to marketers boosting sales, understanding this technique provides a window into the complex ways humans interact, persuade, and influence each other. So next time someone makes what seems like an unreasonable request and then offers a smaller one, take a moment to recognize the psychology at play. It's a brilliant example of how our social instincts, our desire to reciprocate, our sense of fairness, and our need to maintain positive self-perception can be gently guided in subtle ways. The door-in-the-face technique is not just about getting a yes. It's about understanding human behavior, negotiation, and the invisible rules that govern how we respond to others. And that, my friends, is why this psychological trick is one of the most intriguing and widely used strategies in social influence, persuasion, and everyday life, allowing skilled communicators to navigate human behavior with both subtlety and effectiveness while remaining largely unnoticed, because it feels natural, fair, and almost inevitable to the person being influenced. The anchoring effect. Have you ever noticed that the very first number or piece of information you encounter can drastically influence your judgments, decisions, or even what you consider reasonable, even when that number is completely arbitrary? That, my friends, is the anchoring effect at work, and it is one of the most fascinating and pervasive psychological tricks in human cognition, decision-making, and everyday life, subtly shaping how we perceive value, probability, and fairness without us even realizing it. The concept is simple yet profound. When people are exposed to an initial reference point, known as an anchor, they tend to rely heavily on it to make subsequent judgments, even if that anchor is completely irrelevant or random. This effect has been demonstrated across countless experiments and real-world scenarios, from retail pricing to salary negotiations, court decisions, and even dating preferences, and it reveals just how malleable human judgment can be. Imagine you walk into a store and see a designer jacket priced at $1,000. Even if you never intended to spend more than $200, the $1,000 tag creates a mental anchor, and suddenly a $200 jacket seems far more reasonable in comparison. Your perception of value has been subtly guided by that first number, which has now set the stage for all your subsequent judgments. But it's not just about pricing. Anchoring works in any situation where numbers, probabilities, or comparisons are involved. Psychologists Tversky and Kahneman, pioneers in the field of behavioral economics, conducted classic experiments demonstrating this effect in an almost startling way. In one experiment, participants were asked to spin a wheel that randomly landed on a number between 0 and 100 and were then asked whether the percentage of African nations in the United Nations was higher or lower than that number. Afterward, they had to estimate the actual percentage. Astonishingly, even though the number from the wheel was completely random and irrelevant, it significantly influenced participants' estimates. Those exposed to a high number on the wheel gave higher estimates, while those exposed to a low number gave lower estimates. This experiment demonstrates just how powerful anchors are in shaping our cognitive processes. They provide a reference point that our brains unconsciously use to make decisions, even when logically the anchor should be ignored. The underlying mechanism is rooted in the way humans process information. When faced with uncertainty, our brains seek shortcuts to simplify complex decisions, and anchors act as a cognitive shortcut. Rather than considering all information equally or recalculating from scratch, our minds gravitate toward the anchor as a starting point, adjusting only partially away from it. the adjustment is usually insufficient, which is why the anchor exerts such a strong influence. This is also why the anchoring effect can be so insidious. People often believe they are making independent, rational judgments, when in reality, their decisions are being subtly nudged by the very first number or piece of information they encountered. Retailers, negotiators, and marketers have long exploited this phenomenon, often without customers realizing it. For instance, you might see a luxury watch advertised with a regular price of $5,000, discounted to $2,500. The $5,000 serves as an anchor, making $2,500 appear far more affordable than it might otherwise. Similarly, in salary negotiations, the first number mentioned often becomes the anchor around which the discussion revolves. If an employer starts with a lowball offer, the employee may unknowingly anchor their counteroffer closer to that number than they would have if the first offer hadn't been made. Conversely, starting high can set a more favorable anchor for the person making the initial offer. The anchoring effect isn't limited to numbers. It can also apply to expectations, judgments about people, and predictions about outcomes. For example, if someone tells you that a movie is incredibly popular and rated 9 out of 10, your perception of the movie's quality and your likelihood of enjoying it is now influenced by that anchor. Even if you later discover other reviews suggesting a lower rating, the initial 9-10 anchor can linger and bias your final judgment. What makes anchoring even more interesting is its persistence and subconscious nature. Research shows that once an anchor is established, it continues to influence our thinking even when we are aware of it. People often try to adjust away from the anchor, but the adjustments are usually insufficient, meaning the anchor exerts a residual effect that can last throughout the decision-making process. Anchoring also interacts with other cognitive biases, creating a kind of feedback loop that reinforces the initial judgment. For example, confirmation bias can make us selectively pay attention to information that aligns with the anchor, while ignoring or downplaying information that contradicts it, further solidifying the influence of the initial reference point. In practical life, the anchoring effect has profound implications. Negotiating a car purchase, deciding how much to tip, setting prices for products or services, estimating project timelines, or even forming first impressions of people can all be shaped by anchors. Imagine interviewing for a new job. The first impression your interviewer forms acts as an anchor, influencing subsequent evaluations of your skills, personality, and suitability for the position. Similarly, in legal settings, research shows that initial sentencing recommendations or damage claims can anchor judges and juries, subtly affecting final verdicts and awards. But here's the most intriguing part. Understanding the anchoring effect not only helps us recognize when we are being influenced, but it also allows us to use it ethically to guide decisions and negotiations in positive ways. For instance, if you're trying to encourage charitable donations, presenting a suggested donation amount first acts as an anchor, increasing the likelihood that people will contribute around that value. In education, teachers can use anchoring to guide student expectations and goal setting by framing initial targets in a motivating way. Moreover, the anchoring effect reminds us of the incredible complexity of human cognition. Our brains are constantly trying to simplify and make sense of an overwhelmingly complex world, and sometimes the shortcuts we take, like relying on anchors, can lead to systematic biases that shape our perceptions and behavior in predictable ways. This insight has led to the rise of behavioral economics, a field that examines how psychological principles like anchoring affect decision-making in real-world contexts, from consumer behavior to financial markets, healthcare choices, and public policy. By studying these biases, psychologists and economists have learned that humans are not purely rational beings but are deeply influenced by subtle contextual cues, reference points, and prior information, all of which can act as anchors, guiding us in ways that feel natural but are often hidden beneath the surface of conscious thought. And the beauty of the anchoring effect is that it's universally relevant. It works across cultures, age groups, and domains of life. Whether you're negotiating a business deal, shopping for a new laptop, estimating the duration of a project, or simply deciding how long to wait in line, anchors influence your judgments in ways you may not even notice. Understanding this trick gives you a mental superpower. You can recognize when your decisions are being subtly guided, adjust your thinking more deliberately, and even use anchors strategically to influence outcomes ethically and effectively. So next time you encounter a number, price, rating, or first impression, pause and reflect. Is your judgment truly independent, or is it being shaped by an invisible anchor planted in your mind? The anchoring effect is a testament to the incredible subtlety of human psychology, revealing that even something as simple as a number or initial piece of information can shape our behavior, perceptions, and decisions in profound and sometimes surprising ways. And that, my friends, is why the anchoring effect is one of the most powerful psychological tricks you can learn to recognize and understand, not just to avoid being manipulated, but also to navigate the world with greater awareness and influence, making smarter, more deliberate choices in every aspect of life, from personal decisions to social interactions, negotiations, and beyond. The Pygmalion effect. Have you ever wondered why sometimes people seem to rise to the occasion when someone believes in them, while at other times they underperform when they feel underestimated? That's the fascinating psychological phenomenon known as the Pygmalion effect, also sometimes referred to as the Rosenthal effect, and it reveals just how powerful expectations can be in shaping human behavior, achievement, and self-perception, often in ways that are subtle yet profoundly influential. At its core, the Pygmalion effect is about the idea that high expectations lead to improved performance, while low expectations can lead to decreased performance, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. The term originates from the Greek myth of Pygmalion, a sculptor who fell in love with a statue he created, which then came to life. In psychological terms, it illustrates the power of beliefs, perceptions, and expectations to influence reality. The classic experiment by Robert Rosenthal and Lenore Jacobson in the 1960s provides a striking example of this effect. In their study, teachers were told that certain students in their classroom were expected to show exceptional intellectual growth over the school year, even though those students were actually selected at random. Remarkably, by the end of the year, the students who were expected to excel demonstrated significantly greater academic improvement compared to their peers. The study illustrated that the teacher's expectations, often subtle and unconscious, influenced how they interacted with the students, provided feedback, and offered encouragement, thereby shaping the students' actual performance. What's incredible about the Pygmalion effect is how it operates subconsciously. Teachers, managers, parents, or peers may not even be aware that their expectations are influencing behavior, yet those expectations subtly shape the environment, the feedback given, the attention paid, and the opportunities offered. This means that the beliefs we hold about others, whether positive or negative, can profoundly impact their motivation, confidence, and ultimately, their outcomes. The psychological mechanism behind the Pygmalion effect is rooted in social and cognitive processes. When someone believes in your potential, they provide more support, encouragement, and constructive feedback. They pay more attention to your efforts, recognize your achievements, and offer guidance when you face challenges. On the flip side, if someone expects you to underperform, they may unconsciously provide less support, overlook your successes, and even communicate doubt or skepticism through tone, body language, or subtle cues. Over time, these signals affect your self-esteem, motivation, and confidence, influencing the way you approach tasks, challenges, and goals. The effect is not limited to classrooms. It's pervasive across workplaces, sports, relationships, and any setting where performance and expectations intersect. In the workplace, for instance, managers who hold high expectations for their employees, coupled with support and constructive feedback, often see higher performance, productivity, and engagement. Conversely, employees who feel underestimated may withdraw effort, avoid taking initiative, or internalize negative beliefs about their capabilities, leading to poorer performance. Sports psychology provides another compelling illustration. Coaches who communicate belief in athletes' abilities, provide structured guidance, and express confidence in their potential often inspire players to achieve more than they would have without that support. This isn't just motivation in a conscious sense. It's a complex interplay between expectations, behavior, reinforcement, and perception that ultimately shapes actual performance. What makes the Pygmalion effect especially fascinating is its feedback loop. High expectations lead to increased effort and performance, which in turn confirms the original expectation, reinforcing belief in the person's capabilities. Similarly, low expectations create a downward spiral, where decreased performance seems to validate the initial skepticism. Understanding this feedback loop can transform the way we approach education, management, parenting, and personal relationships, because it highlights the immense responsibility inherent in how we treat others and communicate expectations. Interestingly, the Pygmalion effect also intersects with self-fulfilling prophecy in broader social contexts. When someone is labeled as capable, talented, or intelligent, the label often shapes opportunities, access to resources, and social interactions, which further reinforce the initial perception. Conversely, labels such as difficult, lazy, or underperforming can limit opportunities and subtly constrain growth, illustrating the profound societal implications of expectation-driven influence. The Pygmalion effect doesn't just rely on verbal communication, it also works through nonverbal cues and microbehaviors. Teachers or managers may unconsciously spend more time with high-expectation students or employees, smile more often, offer more eye contact, or provide subtle signs of encouragement. These signals, even when brief or unintentional, communicate belief in someone's ability and can dramatically affect motivation and confidence over time. What's also striking is that the Pygmalion effect can be leveraged ethically to create positive outcomes in almost any setting. In education, teachers can deliberately foster high expectations while providing support and guidance, helping students unlock hidden potential. In workplaces, leaders can communicate belief in their teams, challenge them with meaningful goals, and provide constructive feedback, cultivating growth. And engagement. In personal development, mentors and peers can offer encouragement and reinforce belief in someone's abilities, creating a nurturing environment where potential is more likely to flourish. There is also a fascinating interplay with the concept of mindset, as explored by psychologist Carol Dweck. A growth mindset, which emphasizes learning and improvement over fixed ability, aligns perfectly with the Pygmalion effect. When someone believes in your capacity to grow and improve, that belief encourages you to embrace challenges, persist through setbacks, and ultimately achieve more than you would have if someone doubted your potential. On the other hand, a fixed mindset or negative expectations can undermine confidence and discourage effort, echoing the downward spiral of the low expectation Pygmalion effect. The effect extends even into the realm of self-expectation. People internalize the expectations of those around them, shaping how they view their own abilities. When someone consistently expresses belief in your potential, you start to adopt that belief as part of your self-concept, increasing resilience, perseverance, and performance. Conversely, persistent doubt or low expectations can lead to self-doubt, anxiety, and reduced motivation. Culturally, the Pygmalion effect demonstrates that expectations are not just personal, they are social and environmental. Societal norms, institutional expectations, and peer perceptions all interact with individual belief systems, shaping the opportunities available and influencing achievement in ways that can be either empowering or limiting. Awareness of this effect allows us to consciously intervene, offering support, encouragement, and belief in potential to foster growth, learning, and positive outcomes across multiple domains. And perhaps the most powerful insight from understanding the Pygmalion effect is that our expectations are not neutral. They are powerful tools that can either nurture or hinder growth. By consciously cultivating high expectations, supporting effort, and providing constructive feedback, we can help others unlock potential they may not even realize they possess. This understanding transforms how we teach, lead, parent, mentor, and interact with others, emphasizing the profound responsibility and opportunity inherent in how we communicate belief, encouragement, and expectations. So the next time you interact with someone, whether a student, employee, friend, or family member, remember the subtle power of the Pygmalion effect. The expectations you communicate, even unconsciously, can shape their confidence, motivation, and performance in ways that are profound, lasting, and deeply human. Believing in someone's potential isn't just a kind gesture. It's a scientifically validated psychological force that can literally change outcomes, guiding individuals toward greater achievement, self-efficacy, and personal growth. And that, my friends, is why the Pygmalion effect is not just a fascinating psychological trick, but one of the most impactful forces in human interaction, demonstrating that expectations, when wielded thoughtfully, can help people rise to heights they never imagined, creating a ripple effect of positive influence that extends far beyond the moment of interaction. The scarcity principle. Have you ever noticed how something instantly feels more valuable the moment it becomes limited, rare, or threatened with unavailability? That sense of urgency, that pull you feel when an item is limited edition or a deal is only available for 24 hours, isn't just marketing hype. It's a fundamental psychological trick known as the scarcity principle, and it's one of the most powerful drivers of human behavior, decision-making, and desire. At its core, the scarcity principle operates on a simple but deeply rooted idea. Humans tend to place a higher value on things that are scarce or difficult to obtain. Psychologists and behavioral economists have long studied this phenomenon, revealing that scarcity taps into both evolutionary instincts and cognitive biases, creating powerful motivations that influence our choices in ways we often don't consciously recognize. Evolutionarily speaking, scarcity matters because, for our ancestors, resources were often limited. Food, shelter, tools, and even social alliances were all finite. Those who were more attentive to scarcity and more motivated to acquire limited resources were more likely to survive and pass on their genes. Today, that instinct manifests in our attraction to rare or exclusive items, from products and experiences to information and opportunities, even when the stakes are no longer about survival but about social, emotional, or psychological satisfaction. One of the classic studies demonstrating the power of scarcity was conducted by Wurchel, Lee, and Adewole in 1975, using cookies as the test object. Participants were shown 2 jars of cookies. One jar contained 10 cookies, while the other jar contained only 2. When asked to rate the desirability of the cookies, participants consistently rated the cookies from the scarce jar as far more desirable, tastier, and valuable, even though both jars contained identical cookies. This experiment highlights that Scarcity itself, not inherent quality, is enough to elevate perceived value. But the scarcity principle doesn't just work with tangible goods. It also shapes our behavior in social and informational contexts. For instance, if an event is labeled exclusive or by invitation only, it suddenly feels more important, prestigious, or desirable. Similarly, information that is difficult to access or time-sensitive feels more valuable than information that is abundant or readily available. This is why people are drawn to limited-time offers, rare collectibles, exclusive memberships, or insider knowledge, because scarcity triggers a psychological sense of urgency and perceived importance. Cognitive mechanisms help explain why scarcity has such a powerful effect. One key factor is reactance, a psychological response that occurs when we perceive our freedom to choose is threatened. When an item, opportunity, or resource becomes scarce, our brain interprets this as a restriction on freedom, prompting us to act to restore control by acquiring what is limited. This reaction is automatic and often operates beneath conscious awareness, which is why scarcity-based marketing and social influence tactics can feel almost irresistible. Another mechanism is loss aversion, a cornerstone of behavioral economics, which suggests that humans are more motivated to avoid losses than to achieve gains. Scarcity leverages this principle by framing opportunities as fleeting or at risk of being lost. A limited stock warning or a last chance notice signals that failure to act could result in a missed opportunity, heightening the perceived cost of inaction and increasing the likelihood of compliance, purchase, or engagement. Scarcity also intersects with social proof and competition. When resources are scarce, we often look to others for cues about value and priority. If other people are competing for a limited item, our brain interprets this as an additional signal of desirability, creating a feedback loop where scarcity enhances perceived value, which attracts more attention, increasing competition, which further heightens perceived scarcity. Retailers, marketers, and influencers exploit this principle constantly, but it's equally applicable to everyday life. For example, auction houses create intense desire for artwork by highlighting rarity, while travel companies advertise only a few seats left to encourage bookings. Even social interactions aren't immune. Limited attention, time, or exclusivity can make people or experiences feel more attractive or valuable. But here's what's truly fascinating. Scarcity affects not only what we want, but also how we think and behave. Research has shown that scarcity triggers higher emotional arousal, faster decision-making, and increased willingness to take risks. When something is scarce, we may overlook flaws, exaggerate benefits, or prioritize immediate acquisition over careful evaluation. This explains why limited edition items often sell out quickly despite higher prices or minimal difference from regular versions. The psychological impact of scarcity is further amplified when combined with time pressure or uniqueness cues. For instance, a product advertised as only 100 units available is more compelling than one with unlimited availability. But if those units are also only available for a short window, the perceived urgency skyrockets. Similarly, framing an experience or opportunity as one-of-a-kind heightens both desire and perceived personal value, making individuals more likely to act immediately, often without rational deliberation. Scarcity also shapes perception and cognition in subtle ways. Studies show that when resources are scarce, people focus more intently on acquiring them, sometimes at the expense of other considerations, such as quality, price, or alternatives. This tunnel vision effect can explain impulsive purchases, snap decisions, and heightened competition in both social and economic environments. Scarcity also impacts social relationships and personal motivation. For example, individuals who feel time-limited in pursuing goals often report higher productivity, focus, and effort, demonstrating that scarcity doesn't just increase desire. It can enhance performance when managed effectively. However, there's a flip side. Scarcity can also increase stress, anxiety, and decision-making errors when resources feel excessively constrained or unattainable. Understanding the scarcity principle allows us to navigate these dynamics more consciously. By recognizing when scarcity is driving our decisions, we can pause, evaluate objectively, and make more deliberate choices. Similarly, we can harness scarcity ethically to motivate positive behaviors, encouraging timely action, prioritization, or engagement without resorting to manipulation or exploitation. Beyond marketing and consumer behavior, scarcity also plays a role in education, career development, and personal growth. Deadlines, limited access to mentors, or exclusive opportunities create natural scarcity that can heighten motivation, focus, and effort, pushing individuals to achieve more than they might under conditions of abundance or lax availability. This demonstrates that scarcity is not inherently negative. It's a tool, and like any tool, its impact depends on how it's applied. What makes the scarcity principle so compelling is its universality and subtlety. It doesn't require coercion or explicit persuasion. It works through perception, cognition, and emotion, leveraging innate tendencies toward loss aversion, competition, and desire for rare resources. Whether in commerce, personal interactions, education, or self-motivation, scarcity shapes decisions in ways that are profound yet often invisible, influencing human behavior every day without conscious awareness. And that, my friends, is why the scarcity principle is considered one of the most powerful psychological tricks in the world. It reveals that desire isn't solely about intrinsic value. It's about perceived availability, rarity, and urgency, which our brains interpret as critical cues for action. By understanding and recognizing scarcity, we gain insight into human motivation, decision-making, and the subtle levers that guide behavior, giving us the ability to act deliberately, influence ethically, and navigate a world full of limited opportunities with awareness, strategy, and insight. Scarcity teaches us that sometimes what we value most isn't just about what exists. It's about what might be lost, what is unique, and what is fleeting. And by understanding this, we unlock a deeper comprehension of human psychology, influence, and the invisible forces that shape our choices every single day. The halo effect. Have you ever met someone, maybe in school, work, or even online, and immediately thought they were amazing in every way just because you noticed one standout quality, like their attractiveness, intelligence, or confidence? That almost magical tendency to let a single positive trait influence your overall perception of someone is called the halo effect, and it's one of the most fascinating and influential psychological tricks in how we evaluate people, situations, and even products, often without realizing it. At its core, the halo effect is a type of cognitive bias in which our overall impression of a person, brand, or object is shaped disproportionately by one positive or even negative characteristic. Psychologists first coined the term in the 1920s, and since then, decades of research have confirmed its powerful impact across social interactions, hiring decisions, education, marketing, and even legal judgments. Essentially, when we perceive a strong positive trait, like physical attractiveness or charisma, our brain tends to unconsciously assume other positive qualities must also exist, creating a halo of perceived excellence that colors our entire judgment. Conversely, the same mechanism can work negatively, where one undesirable characteristic casts a shadow over how we perceive everything else about a person. The halo effect taps into our brain's tendency to simplify complex social judgments. Humans constantly navigate an overwhelming amount of information about others, their skills, intentions, values, and behaviors, and our brains often use shortcuts to make rapid assessments. The halo effect acts as one of these shortcuts. Noticing a single positive attribute allows our mind to fill in the gaps with assumptions that are generally favorable, reducing cognitive load and making social evaluation more efficient. But the implications are profound. For example, in education, studies show that teachers' expectations can be influenced by students' attractiveness, neatness, or initial performance. A student who appears attentive, polite, or attractive may receive higher grades, more encouragement, or additional opportunities, not solely because of objective merit, but because of the positive halo generated by these initial impressions. Similarly, in the workplace, hiring managers often fall prey to the halo effect when evaluating resumes or conducting interviews. An applicant who is charismatic, well-dressed, or has an impressive credential may be perceived as more competent, intelligent, or capable across unrelated domains, potentially overshadowing other candidates who may be more qualified but don't trigger the same initial impression. Research has even shown that the halo effect can influence legal judgments. In courtroom settings, witnesses or defendants who are physically attractive, well-spoken, or socially appealing may receive more favorable evaluations, lighter sentences, or greater credibility, while those with negative first impressions can experience the opposite bias. Marketing and advertising exploit this effect constantly. Companies often pair products with celebrities, models, or trusted figures precisely because the positive halo surrounding that person extends to the product itself. For example, a popular actor endorsing a perfume or a high-end gadget can make consumers perceive the product as higher quality, more desirable, or more effective, even without additional evidence about its performance. This psychological shortcut works because humans rely heavily on heuristics, or mental rules of thumb, to make rapid decisions. The halo effect taps into the heuristic of associating a single positive trait with overall quality or competence, which can save time and effort in decision-making but also introduces systematic bias. Interestingly, the halo effect isn't limited to attractiveness or charisma. It can emerge from any prominent feature, whether it's perceived intelligence, kindness, professional status, or even subtle cues like tone of voice or clothing. Essentially, our brains are wired to create a coherent impression based on the most salient information, often giving disproportionate weight to a single characteristic that stands out. The effect can also shape self-perception. People who receive positive feedback based on one trait may internalize the halo and begin to see themselves as more competent, likable, or capable overall. Conversely, those subjected to negative first impressions may experience lower confidence, self-doubt, or social anxiety, which can impact performance and behavior in ways that reinforce the original bias. What's particularly striking is how early in life the halo effect appears. Studies have shown that even children, when judging peers, exhibit the same bias. A child perceived as friendly or attractive is often assumed to be intelligent, helpful, and socially competent. This demonstrates that the halo effect is deeply rooted in human cognition, not just a learned social behavior. But there's more. Research also reveals that the halo effect can influence group dynamics and organizational culture. In teams or classrooms, a single well-regarded individual can elevate perceptions of the entire group, creating an overall impression of competence, cohesion, or quality that may not entirely reflect reality. Conversely, one negative actor can cast a shadow over collective evaluations, highlighting the importance of awareness in leadership and management contexts. The halo effect interacts with other cognitive biases as well. For example, confirmation bias can amplify the effect. Once we form a positive overall impression, we are more likely to notice information that supports it and ignore or discount contradictory evidence. Similarly, the horn effect, essentially the negative counterpart of the halo effect, demonstrates that one negative trait can similarly distort judgment, reinforcing the asymmetric nature of human perception. Understanding the halo effect gives us a powerful tool for both self-awareness and ethical influence. Recognizing when we are overgeneralizing from a single trait can help us make fairer, more objective judgments about people, situations, and products. At the same time, those in positions of leadership, education, or marketing can use the halo effect responsibly to create positive first impressions that support trust, engagement, and motivation, while avoiding manipulation or unfair bias. In personal relationships, the halo effect can shape attraction, trust, and social evaluation. Early impressions often create an initial halo that guides subsequent interaction. Someone who is warm, confident, or kind in the first encounter may be judged more favorably across other traits, whereas someone perceived negatively may struggle to overcome that initial shadow. Interestingly, the effect can also extend to self-improvement and personal branding. If you consciously develop and highlight a standout positive trait, whether it's expertise, reliability, creativity, or appearance, you can generate a halo that enhances perception in multiple domains of your life, from career advancement to social influence and beyond. The halo effect reminds us of the subtle, often invisible ways in which our brains process complex information, revealing both the efficiency and the vulnerability of human judgment. It's a trick our minds play on us, taking shortcuts to simplify evaluation but sometimes distorting reality, leading us to overvalue certain attributes and undervalue others. By becoming aware of this bias, we gain insight into why people, products, and situations may appear more impressive or less so than they objectively are, and we can navigate decisions with greater clarity, fairness, and strategic influence. And that, my friends, is why the halo effect is one of the most intriguing psychological tricks in human perception. It highlights the incredible power of first impressions, the influence of salient traits, and the subtle biases that shape our evaluations in virtually every aspect of life. Whether in education, the workplace, personal relationships, or marketing, the halo effect shows us that perception is often as important as reality, and understanding it gives us the ability to interpret the world more wisely, influence ethically, and recognize the invisible forces guiding our judgments every single day. Cognitive dissonance. Have you ever done something that didn't quite line up with your beliefs or values, and suddenly you found yourself justifying it in a way that felt almost automatic, like your brain was smoothing over the inconsistency? That's the fascinating psychological trick known as cognitive dissonance, and it's one of the most powerful forces influencing human thought, behavior, and decision-making, often without our conscious awareness. At its core, cognitive dissonance occurs when a person experiences mental discomfort or tension because they hold two or more contradictory beliefs, values, or attitudes, or when their behavior conflicts with their beliefs. This tension is psychologically uncomfortable, and humans are naturally motivated to reduce it, often by changing beliefs, rationalizing behavior, or selectively focusing on information that aligns with their actions. The concept was first introduced by Leon Festinger in the 1950s, who noticed that people are highly driven to maintain internal consistency, and when inconsistencies arise, they often take surprisingly creative mental steps to resolve the discomfort. For example, imagine someone who considers themselves health-conscious but eats a chocolate bar every day. That behavior conflicts with their self-perception as a healthy person, creating dissonance. To reduce it, they might rationalize, I exercise enough, so this little treat won't hurt, or chocolate has antioxidants, so it's actually good for me. Notice how the brain resolves tension by adjusting beliefs or interpretations rather than forcing behavior change. It's much easier psychologically to reframe the situation than to completely alter habits. Cognitive dissonance isn't just about trivial choices. It can shape major life decisions, social behavior, and moral reasoning. For instance, people who commit to a difficult task like quitting smoking or completing a challenging project often increase their commitment by emphasizing the positive reasons for their action and downplaying the negatives. This is why expensive or effortful decisions often lead to higher satisfaction afterward. Once we invest significant time, energy, or money into something, our brain reduces dissonance by convincing us that the choice was worthwhile, even if initially we had doubts. One classic experiment demonstrating cognitive dissonance involved college students performing a boring task and then being asked to tell the next participant that the task was fun. Some students were paid $1, while others were paid $20. Surprisingly, those paid only $1 rated the task as more enjoyable afterward, while those paid $20 didn't. Why? The $1 payment wasn't enough to justify the lie externally. So the students resolved the dissonance by genuinely convincing themselves the task was enjoyable. Those with $20 had sufficient external justification for lying, so no internal adjustment was necessary. This illustrates a key aspect of cognitive dissonance. When external justification is low, internal belief changes to reduce tension. When external justification is high, internal beliefs remain more stable. The effect plays a huge role in social behavior and persuasion. For example, if someone publicly advocates for a belief or behavior, they often adjust their private attitude to align with their public stance, reinforcing commitment. This is why pledges, public commitments, and even social media posts can be surprisingly effective tools for shaping behavior. Once someone has declared a belief or action, they feel compelled to align their attitudes with their statements to avoid dissonance. Cognitive dissonance also impacts consumer behavior. People often rationalize purchases after the fact, convincing themselves that an expensive or indulgent item was worth it. Advertisers leverage this by emphasizing prestige, quality, or long-term value, making consumers more likely to feel satisfied and reduce dissonance after a purchase. Similarly, people may change their opinions about a brand or product to align with their previous choices, creating a self-reinforcing loop of belief and behavior. Another fascinating aspect of cognitive dissonance is its role in moral and ethical reasoning. When people act in ways that conflict with their moral standards, they often engage in rationalizations to preserve self-esteem and avoid guilt. This can lead to subtle distortions in perception, selective attention to information, or reinterpretation of outcomes to reduce tension between behavior and values. Political beliefs, social attitudes, and personal ideologies are particularly susceptible to dissonance-driven adjustments because people are highly motivated to maintain a coherent sense of self and worldview. Cognitive dissonance also influences habit formation and behavior change. For instance, when someone publicly commits to a goal, such as exercising regularly or reducing screen time, they feel internal pressure to follow through. The discomfort of dissonance between what they say they will do and what they actually do drives action, reinforcing behavior patterns that align with their stated intentions. This is why accountability partners, public challenges, or visible tracking systems are effective in promoting lasting change. It's also worth noting that cognitive dissonance is not always negative. It can be a powerful catalyst for growth and self-improvement. When people become aware of inconsistencies in their beliefs or behavior, it can trigger reflection, learning, and positive change. For example, recognizing that you value environmental sustainability but frequently use single-use plastics can motivate behavior adjustments, leading to more environmentally friendly choices. In relationships, cognitive dissonance can shape attachment, loyalty, and decision-making. People may justify staying in challenging situations by emphasizing positive aspects, creating alignment between their behavior and perception of reality. Similarly, dissonance can explain why individuals rationalize difficult choices in love, career, or friendship, often highlighting benefits while downplaying costs. The psychological tension underlying dissonance also interacts with emotional states. Feelings of guilt, shame, embarrassment, or pride can amplify or mitigate the dissonance experience, influencing the strategies people use to resolve it. Positive emotions can make adjustment easier, while negative emotions can create resistance, avoidance, or denial. Cognitive dissonance can even extend to group dynamics. When individuals join groups with strong norms or beliefs, they may adjust their personal attitudes to align with the group, reducing tension between their previous beliefs and the new social environment. This explains phenomena like conformity, ideological shifts, and even radicalization in extreme cases. Awareness of cognitive dissonance gives us a remarkable tool for understanding human behavior and decision-making. By recognizing when tension arises from conflicting beliefs or actions, we can better understand why people justify choices, change opinions, or cling to certain behaviors, often in ways that seem irrational from the outside. Importantly, it also allows us to navigate our own behavior more deliberately. By understanding the mechanisms behind dissonance, we can anticipate moments of tension, make more conscious decisions, and use self-reflection to guide growth rather than simply rationalizing actions automatically. And that, my friends, is why cognitive dissonance is not just a psychological trick but a window into the subtle forces that shape human thought, motivation, and action. It reminds us that the mind constantly seeks harmony, that our beliefs and behaviors are interdependent, and that understanding this interplay allows us to interpret behavior, our own and others, more clearly, make better choices, and even influence outcomes ethically by leveraging the natural human drive to resolve internal conflict in constructive ways. The Benjamin Franklin effect. Have you ever noticed that people sometimes seem to like you more after you ask them for a favor, even if they didn't initially have strong feelings toward you? It might feel counterintuitive, right? You'd think that asking for something might annoy someone, or at least not change their opinion of you, but psychology shows that the opposite often happens. This fascinating principle is called the Benjamin Franklin effect, named after the famous American statesman who reportedly used it strategically to turn political rivals into allies. The basic idea is simple yet powerful. When someone does a favor for you, they are more likely to feel positively toward you afterward, and the bigger or more meaningful the favor, the stronger the effect. This works because of a combination of cognitive dissonance and self-perception. When a person helps someone else, especially if they didn't initially feel positive toward them, their mind experiences a subtle tension. Essentially, their brain asks, "Why am I helping someone I didn't particularly like or support?" In order to resolve that mental discomfort, the person unconsciously adjusts their attitude, concluding that they must like or respect the person they helped. In other words, performing a favor can change the helper's attitude toward the recipient, not just the other way around. The historical story behind this effect comes from Benjamin Franklin himself. Franklin, who was running for political office, had a rival who opposed him. Instead of confronting him or arguing for his cause directly, Franklin asked a simple favor. He requested to borrow a rare book from the rival. The man agreed, and afterward, Franklin noticed a change. He started treating Franklin more favorably, eventually becoming an ally. This story perfectly illustrates how a small action can reshape feelings and relationships. Psychologists have studied this effect extensively and confirmed that even small favors can increase liking, trust, and cooperation. What's interesting is that certain conditions make the effect stronger. The favor should feel voluntary. If someone is pressured, the effect can weaken or disappear. It also helps if the favor requires some effort, because the brain is more motivated to justify actions that cost time, energy, or resources. The more effort involved, the stronger the internal need to reconcile behavior with attitude, which amplifies the positive shift in perception toward the person being helped. In everyday life, this effect has many applications. Consider friendships or personal relationships. Asking for a small favor, like advice, help with a minor task, or even a recommendation, can strengthen bonds because the other person feels involved and responsible in a positive way. They may start seeing you as someone worth helping, increasing their fondness, trust, and connection with you. In professional settings, the principle can be applied ethically to build rapport, trust, and cooperation. Managers, leaders, and colleagues can benefit by requesting input or guidance on meaningful projects. Rather than forcing loyalty or relying solely on persuasion, asking for a favor creates a natural alignment between behavior and attitude, helping people feel positively toward the requester. The effect is also observed in marketing and consumer psychology. Companies often encourage small initial engagements, like filling out surveys, completing a short feedback form, or trying a sample, because these minor actions can increase commitment, positive perception, and willingness to engage further. Once someone takes an initial step, they are more likely to continue interacting with the brand or take larger actions, because their behavior creates a subtle psychological need to perceive themselves and their actions consistently. Another interesting aspect is that the Benjamin Franklin effect often works better than direct flattery, praise, or persuasion. Compliments or attempts to charm someone can sometimes feel forced, insincere, or manipulative, especially if the person is cautious or skeptical. Asking for a favor, however, gives the individual a sense of autonomy and voluntary choice, and because the act is freely chosen, their mind resolves cognitive dissonance by concluding that they like or respect you. Timing and context are important too. The favor should be meaningful enough to require effort, but not so burdensome that it causes frustration or resentment. Small, well-timed requests that align with the person's abilities are ideal, because they maximize voluntary compliance while activating the psychological process that fosters positive feelings. The Benjamin Franklin effect also highlights a deeper truth about human behavior. Our actions influence our perceptions just as much as our perceptions influence our actions. By understanding this principle, we can foster positive social dynamics and build genuine rapport in ways that feel natural, rather than forced. It's also a useful tool in conflict resolution. When dealing with someone resistant or even hostile, asking for a manageable, neutral favor can open the door to cooperation. By allowing them to act helpfully, their mind adjusts their attitude to align with their behavior, softening opposition and building trust. This effect can also create a ripple effect. Once someone helps you and develops a positive perception of you, they are more likely to act positively in the future, creating a reinforcing cycle of cooperation, goodwill, and mutual support. On a more fundamental level, the Benjamin Franklin effect reveals a lot about human motivation and social behavior. We all want to see ourselves as helpful, ethical, and consistent. When we act in alignment with these self-perceptions, it strengthens our identity and our social connections. Conversely, when our behavior conflicts with our self-perception, we unconsciously adjust our attitudes to reduce that tension, which is why performing favors can make people genuinely like you more, even if they didn't initially. Importantly, this principle isn't about manipulation. It's about understanding natural psychological tendencies and using them ethically to strengthen relationships, trust, and cooperation. It highlights the subtle, often invisible ways that psychology shapes social interactions. Influence often comes not from what we say, but from the actions we inspire in others. In essence, the Benjamin Franklin effect shows that a small favor can have a surprisingly big impact, both personally and professionally. It teaches us that influence doesn't have to be aggressive, forceful, or manipulative. It can work through natural alignment between behavior and attitude. Whether in friendships, family dynamics, workplaces, politics, or marketing, the effect shows that people often like us more for what they do for us than for what we do for them. Understanding this effect allows us to navigate social interactions more intelligently, build trust, and strengthen connections simply by inviting others to help. It's a subtle, powerful, and ethical way to foster cooperation, goodwill, and genuine human connection. The scarcity principle. Imagine walking into a store and seeing a sign that says, "Limited stock, only 3 left," or browsing an online shop and noticing that an item is almost sold out. Suddenly, that product feels more valuable, more desirable, and somehow more urgent. That's not just marketing magic. It's a real psychological trick called the scarcity principle, and it's one of the most powerful drivers of human behavior. At its core, the scarcity principle is simple. Humans place a higher value on things that are rare, limited, or difficult to obtain. Psychologists believe this stems from both evolutionary survival instincts and social learning. From an evolutionary perspective, resources were not always abundant, so the ability to recognize scarcity and act quickly was essential for survival. In modern life, this translates into a cognitive bias. When something is scarce, we automatically assume it's more valuable, desirable, or important. But the scarcity principle is not just about physical goods. It affects ideas, opportunities, attention, and even relationships. For example, a job candidate who seems highly sought after may feel more attractive to employers, not necessarily because of objective qualifications, but because the scarcity of their availability triggers the same psychological response. Similarly, in social settings, people sometimes perceive those who are harder to access, less available, or less common as more appealing or valuable. One reason the scarcity principle is so effective is that it creates a sense of urgency and fear of missing out, often called FOMO. When we perceive that an opportunity is limited, our brains shift into a state of heightened attention and motivation, making us more likely to take action quickly, sometimes even impulsively. Marketers have harnessed this principle for decades. Think flash sales, limited editions, early bird specials, or countdown timers on e-commerce sites. The psychology behind this is powerful. Scarcity triggers a perception of exclusivity and unique value, which makes the product or opportunity feel more desirable than if it were widely available. Social psychologists have studied this effect extensively. Experiments show that when people are told that an item is in limited supply, they rate it as more attractive and are more willing to pay a higher price. Similarly, when access to information, social events, or privileges is restricted, people tend to assign higher value to those experiences simply because they are perceived as rare or limited. Scarcity works through multiple mechanisms. One is reactance, the psychological reaction that occurs when people feel their freedom to obtain something is restricted. When someone tells us, "You can't have this," or "It's almost gone," our natural inclination is to assert our autonomy by wanting it even more. This is why phrases like "limited time offer" or "while supplies last" are so effective. They trigger a subtle but powerful urge to act before the opportunity disappears. Scarcity also taps into social proof. When something is rare or in limited supply, it implies that it's popular, desirable, or approved by others. This can amplify the perception of value because humans are wired to look to others for cues on what is worthwhile or important. The effect is also emotional. Scarcity creates a sense of urgency, anticipation, and even anxiety, which can motivate action faster than rational deliberation. In addition, scarcity can enhance memory and attention. When something is rare or limited, it naturally becomes more salient in our minds. We focus on it more, remember it better, and are more likely to discuss it with others. This amplifies its perceived importance and can create a self-reinforcing cycle of desire and action. The scarcity principle is not just about consumer behavior, it also applies in relationships and social dynamics. For example, people often perceive those who are less available or harder to reach as more attractive or intriguing. Similarly, in professional networking, someone who is highly selective about their time or opportunities may be seen as more valuable or prestigious. But scarcity can be a double-edged sword. While it can motivate and focus attention, it can also lead to impulsive or irrational decisions. People may overvalue items simply because they are scarce, ignoring whether the item truly meets their needs or aligns with their goals. Marketers and advertisers sometimes exploit this tendency, which is why being aware of scarcity-driven influence is important for making thoughtful decisions. From a psychological standpoint, scarcity works because it engages multiple human motivations simultaneously. The desire for control, the fear of loss, the drive for social approval, and the natural attraction to novelty and exclusivity. It taps into both cognitive and emotional processes, making it a particularly potent form of influence. Scarcity also interacts with other psychological principles, like the principle of authority or social proof. For example, if an exclusive product is endorsed by a trusted expert or widely recognized as desirable by others, the combined effect can make it almost irresistible. One fascinating aspect of scarcity is that it doesn't always have to be real. It can be perceived. Even if supply is ample, if people believe something is limited, they behave as if it truly is scarce. This highlights the power of perception in human decision-making. What our minds believe to be rare often feels just as valuable as what is actually rare. Understanding the scarcity principle gives us insight into both human behavior and influence. It explains why people rush to buy limited-time products, why some social opportunities feel more desirable, and why exclusivity drives engagement and attention. It also provides strategies for ethical influence. By creating genuine scarcity, whether in information, time-limited offers, or unique experiences, we can motivate action and engagement in a way that respects human psychology. In essence, the scarcity principle reveals that our brains are wired to respond to limitation, rarity, and exclusivity. It shows that value is often perceived more than intrinsic, and that human behavior is strongly influenced by the fear of missing out and the desire for unique opportunities. By understanding and applying this principle thoughtfully, we can better navigate social interactions, marketing, relationships, and decision-making. It's one of the most universal and effective psychological tricks because it taps into fundamental human instincts that have shaped behavior for centuries, from survival to social dynamics. Recognizing when scarcity is influencing our choices can also make us more mindful consumers and more intentional in our actions. The scarcity principle reminds us that sometimes the simple knowledge that something is rare or limited can dramatically change our perception, our motivation, and our behavior, proving just how powerful subtle psychological forces can be in shaping everyday decisions. The Pygmalion effect. Have you ever noticed how people often rise or sometimes fall to the level of expectations set for them? That's the core idea behind the Pygmalion effect, a fascinating psychological phenomenon named after the Greek myth in which Pygmalion, a sculptor, fell in love with a statue he created, which then came to life. In psychology, this effect refers to the way higher expectations can lead to improved performance, and conversely, low expectations can hinder it. Essentially, what we expect from others can subtly influence their behavior, skills, and even their self-perception. The Pygmalion effect is deeply rooted in social and cognitive psychology. When someone, like a teacher, manager, or mentor, believes in a person's abilities, they tend to unconsciously communicate that belief through verbal and nonverbal cues, encouragement, feedback, and opportunities for growth. These subtle behaviors signal to the individual that they are capable and competent, which can increase confidence, motivation, and ultimately performance. Conversely, when someone is expected to underperform, they often internalize that belief, leading to decreased effort, confidence, and achievement. This phenomenon was famously studied in an experiment by Robert Rosenthal and Lenore Jacobson in the 1960s. Teachers were told that certain students in their class were intellectual bloomers, identified through a special test. In reality, these students were selected at random. By the end of the year, the students labeled as bloomers had made significantly greater academic gains compared to their peers. This demonstrated how teacher expectations alone, without any inherent difference in ability, could shape outcomes. The Pygmalion effect has profound implications for every area of life, from education and workplaces to sports and personal relationships. In education, teachers who genuinely believe in their students' potential create an environment where those students feel capable of achieving more, leading to measurable improvements in learning and performance. In the workplace, managers who hold high expectations for their employees' abilities and communicate confidence in them often see increased motivation, productivity, and innovation. This effect isn't just about overt praise or encouragement. It works through subtler mechanisms like body language, tone of voice, assignment of responsibilities, and opportunities for growth. Leaders who consistently expect competence and excellence from their teams send a message that challenges are achievable, mistakes are learning opportunities, and success is anticipated, which motivates employees to rise to the occasion. Conversely, low expectations can have a damaging effect. When leaders, teachers, or peers communicate doubt, intentionally or unintentionally, it can create a self-fulfilling prophecy. Individuals internalize these expectations, leading to decreased effort, confidence, and eventual underperformance. This isn't about manipulation. It's about the natural way humans respond to social cues and perceived expectations. The Pygmalion effect also interacts with self-perception and internal motivation. When someone believes that others believe in them, it enhances their own belief in their abilities, increasing resilience, risk-taking, and persistence. They start to see themselves as capable, which reinforces behavior aligned with that identity. Interestingly, the effect is bidirectional. Not only can expectations shape performance, but performance can also influence expectations, creating a feedback loop. High expectations lead to high performance, which reinforces positive expectations, which in turn encourages further achievement. Similarly, low expectations can create a downward spiral if not consciously addressed. Understanding the Pygmalion effect can be empowering, both as someone in a leadership or mentorship role and as an individual seeking to improve your own performance. Being aware of how expectations, your own and those of others, affect behavior allows you to foster growth, encourage potential, and break cycles of underachievement. It also highlights the responsibility inherent in positions of influence. The way we communicate our beliefs about others' abilities can have long-lasting effects on their confidence, motivation, and success. In personal relationships, applying the Pygmalion effect means supporting and believing in friends, family, or partners in ways that help them realize their potential. Encouraging growth, offering constructive feedback, and modeling belief in their abilities can create an environment where people thrive. On the other hand, being conscious of the subtle negative effects of doubt, criticism, or low expectations can prevent unintentionally undermining someone's confidence. In essence, the Pygmalion effect is a reminder that human potential is often shaped as much by social context and perceived expectations as it is by innate ability. By understanding and applying this principle, we can positively influence learning, growth, and achievement, helping ourselves and others reach levels we might not have imagined possible. It's a powerful psychological tool that demonstrates how belief, communication, and expectation can shape reality itself. The Zeigarnik effect. Have you ever noticed that unfinished tasks, unresolved problems, or even incomplete TV shows stick in your mind far more than completed ones? You keep thinking about them, sometimes obsessively, and it's almost impossible to let them go. That, my friends, is a fascinating psychological phenomenon called the Zeigarnik effect, named after the Russian psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik, who first studied it in the 1920s. Essentially, the effect suggests that people remember uncompleted or interrupted tasks better than completed ones. But why does this happen? Turns out that our brains don't like unresolved tension. When we start a task and don't finish it, it creates a kind of mental open loop, a state of cognitive tension that keeps nagging at our subconscious. The mind craves closure, so unfinished tasks continue to occupy our attention, demanding mental energy until they are resolved. Zeigarnik's original experiment demonstrated this beautifully. She observed that waiters in a busy cafe could remember orders that were still in progress far more accurately than orders that had already been served and completed. This observation led to controlled experiments in which participants were asked to perform tasks, some of which were interrupted before completion. When tested later, participants remembered the interrupted tasks significantly better than the ones they had finished. The Zeigarnik effect has far-reaching implications in daily life, learning, productivity, and even entertainment. For instance, in studying or work, leaving a task partially completed can increase mental recall and engagement because the brain keeps nudging you to finish what you started. Marketers and content creators also exploit this principle masterfully. Cliffhangers in TV shows, books, or movies leverage the Zeigarnik effect by creating unfinished storylines that keep audiences thinking about the plot, eagerly anticipating the next episode or chapter. Similarly, advertising campaigns often tease products or features without fully revealing them, knowing that incomplete information creates curiosity and mental tension, which motivates action, engagement, or further exploration. This effect also explains why to-do lists, reminders, and unfinished projects can dominate your thoughts. The brain keeps the uncompleted tasks active in working memory, which can create both motivation and stress. Understanding the Zeigarnik effect allows us to harness it effectively. For productivity, you can break large tasks into smaller, manageable pieces and intentionally leave small parts incomplete at strategic moments to maintain focus and motivation. Conversely, being aware of its potential to create stress can help you manage unfinished tasks more mindfully, ensuring that the tension it creates is productive rather than overwhelming. The Zeigarnik effect also interacts with other cognitive principles like the goal gradient effect, the tendency to accelerate effort as we get closer to completing a goal. Together, these principles help explain why partial progress can drive motivation and why humans are so attuned to unfinished business. On a deeper level, the effect highlights a fundamental truth about human cognition. Our minds are wired to prioritize unresolved information, likely as an evolutionary adaptation. In our ancestors' environments, remembering incomplete tasks or unresolved threats could have been critical for survival, helping them attend to potential dangers, uncompleted hunts, or pending responsibilities. Today, this same mechanism shows up in modern contexts, from studying to binge-watching, from creative projects to managing daily responsibilities. In relationships and social dynamics, the Zeigarnik effect also plays a subtle role. Unresolved conversations, unanswered messages, or lingering conflicts tend to occupy our thoughts more than resolved interactions. This mental stickiness explains why closure in communication, forgiveness, or conflict resolution is so psychologically satisfying. Finishing the loop releases cognitive tension and restores mental balance. The effect can be leveraged in teaching and learning as well. Educators who intentionally pause lessons at key points, leaving a question unanswered or a problem partially solved, can increase engagement and memory retention. Students are more likely to think about and revisit the material on their own, because the brain keeps the incomplete task active until it is resolved. In essence, the Zeigarnik effect reminds us that our brains are wired to notice, remember, and prioritize unfinished business. Whether it's in work, learning, entertainment, or personal life, incomplete tasks create mental tension that drives attention, motivation, and memory. By understanding this principle, we can use it strategically to improve productivity, enhance learning, and even craft compelling stories or content. At the same time, awareness of its potential to create stress allows us to manage our cognitive load more effectively, ensuring that the effect works for us rather than against us. In short, the Zeigarnik effect is a subtle but powerful psychological trick that reveals how our minds are naturally drawn to what's unfinished, unresolved, or interrupted, and it gives us the tools to harness that natural tendency for greater focus, creativity, and engagement. The illusion of transparency. Have you ever felt like everyone around you can tell exactly what you're thinking or feeling, even when you try to hide it? Maybe during a presentation, you felt nervous and thought the audience could see every ounce of your anxiety. Or in a conversation, you worried that your emotions were painfully obvious, only to find out later that nobody noticed. This phenomenon is known as the illusion of transparency, a psychological trick of the mind that makes us overestimate how visible our internal states are to others. In simple terms, it's the tendency to believe that our thoughts, emotions, or intentions are more apparent to others than they actually are. The illusion of transparency has deep roots in social cognition and self-awareness. Our brains are wired to monitor our own internal states closely, and we often assume that others are paying the same level of attention we are to our outward expressions. Because we experience our emotions so vividly internally, it's easy to overestimate how much these feelings leak to others. Psychologists first studied this effect through experiments in which participants were asked to perform tasks while hiding certain emotions, such as nervousness or deception. When observers were asked to judge the participants' emotions, they were significantly less accurate than the participants expected. In other words, people consistently overestimated how obvious their internal states were to others. This illusion has important implications in daily life. For example, public speaking anxiety is often magnified by the illusion of transparency. Speakers imagine that every quiver, stumble, or flush is painfully obvious, which increases self-consciousness and stress. In reality, audiences are generally far less attuned to subtle signs of anxiety than we believe, meaning the pressure we feel is often internally inflated. The illusion of transparency also shows up in social interactions and conflict. When we are upset, embarrassed, or uncertain, we often assume that others can tell exactly what we're feeling. This can lead to over-apologizing, over-explaining, or excessive self-monitoring, none of which is necessary, because people typically perceive far less than we imagine. Awareness of this psychological trick can improve communication, confidence, and emotional regulation. By realizing that our emotions are less visible than we think, we can reduce unnecessary stress, moderate self-conscious behavior, and approach social situations with greater calm. The effect also interacts with other cognitive biases, such as the spotlight effect, which is the belief that others notice our actions or appearance far more than they actually do. Together, these biases can create a distorted sense of visibility, making us feel exposed even in ordinary situations. In professional settings, the illusion of transparency can have both positive and negative consequences. On one hand, it can make leaders or team members assume their intentions or reasoning are obvious, leading to miscommunication. On the other hand, understanding the effect can improve empathy, as recognizing that internal states are less visible allows us to approach others' behaviors with curiosity rather than judgment. In personal relationships, this illusion plays a subtle role as well. We might overestimate how aware friends or partners are of our feelings, leading to misunderstandings or overreactions. Recognizing that emotions are often invisible to others can improve clarity, patience, and communication in everyday interactions. Interestingly, the illusion of transparency can also be leveraged strategically. For instance, in teaching or training, instructors can assume that students are less aware of difficulties or confusion than they appear. This encourages better explanation, guidance, and checking for understanding. Similarly, in negotiation or persuasion, realizing that others may not fully perceive your internal states allows you to maintain composure and make decisions more rationally. On a deeper level, this effect highlights the human tendency to overestimate our influence on others' perceptions. It reveals how subjective our awareness is and how our internal experience can distort our assumptions about social reality. The illusion of transparency is essentially a cognitive trick, showing that we are not always as readable as we believe. In essence, understanding this phenomenon is empowering. It can reduce anxiety, improve social confidence, enhance communication, and foster empathy. By recognizing that our internal thoughts, fears, and emotions are less obvious to others than we assume, we can interact more authentically, focus on what really matters, and navigate both professional and personal situations more effectively. In short, the illusion of transparency shows that while our minds can make us feel like we're on display constantly most of the time, others are much less aware than we think. And realizing this can dramatically improve the way we relate to the world around us. The fading effect bias. Have you ever noticed that negative experiences seem to fade faster from your memory than positive ones? Maybe an argument, a failure, or a stressful situation that once felt intense now feels distant or even trivial, while joyful or exciting events linger vividly in your mind. This isn't just coincidence. It's a fascinating psychological phenomenon called the fading effect bias, a subtle trick your brain plays to help regulate emotions and maintain mental well-being. In simple terms, the fading effect bias refers to the tendency for negative emotions associated with memories to weaken over time, while positive emotions remain stronger and more vivid. Psychologists believe this bias evolved as a coping mechanism, helping humans maintain psychological resilience in the face of challenges. By allowing negative memories to lose emotional intensity more quickly than positive ones, the mind protects our mental health and encourages us to focus on rewarding or beneficial experiences. Studies of the fading effect bias have demonstrated its effects across various contexts. Participants are asked to recall positive and negative events from their past and rate the intensity of the emotions associated with each memory. The results consistently show that negative emotions decline faster over time than positive emotions, even when the original events were equally intense. This bias occurs regardless of whether the memories are personal, social, or even trivial daily experiences, highlighting its role as a general cognitive mechanism rather than a situational anomaly. One fascinating aspect of the fading effect bias is how it shapes our perception of personal growth and identity. By allowing the sting of past failures or painful experiences to fade, the mind creates space for optimism, confidence, and resilience. Conversely, by retaining the positive emotions associated with successes, relationships, or joyful moments, the brain reinforces behaviors and choices that contributed to our well-being. In practical terms, the fading affect bias has profound implications for mental health, motivation, and decision-making. For example, people are often better able to learn from mistakes without becoming paralyzed by regret or fear, because the negative emotions associated with errors fade over time. Similarly, positive experiences remain salient, guiding future decisions and encouraging repeat behaviors that contribute to success and satisfaction. Interestingly, this bias doesn't mean that negative memories disappear completely. We still retain the factual details of challenges, mistakes, or painful events. What fades is primarily the emotional intensity, the gut-level hurt, embarrassment, or frustration, which allows us to reflect on experiences more rationally and learn without being overwhelmed by emotion. The fading effect bias also interacts with other cognitive and emotional mechanisms. For example, the positivity effect in aging research suggests that older adults focus more on positive information and memories, which aligns with the fading effect bias to enhance life satisfaction and emotional well-being. Similarly, mindfulness and reflective practices can influence how the bias manifests, allowing us to consciously process negative experiences without letting them dominate our emotional landscape. In relationships, the fading effect bias plays a subtle but important role. Couples often remember positive experiences, shared joys, and acts of love more vividly than past conflicts, which contributes to long-term satisfaction and emotional bonding. Conflicts may feel intense at the moment but lose emotional weight over time, allowing relationships to recover and grow. The bias also has interesting implications for storytelling, content creation, and marketing. Narratives that include challenges or setbacks, followed by positive outcomes, resonate deeply because the audience can emotionally engage with tension while ultimately retaining the positive takeaway. This pattern aligns with the brain's natural tendency to let negative emotional peaks fade while keeping positive outcomes salient. On a deeper psychological level, the fading effect bias highlights the human mind's remarkable ability to self-regulate emotions, balance experiences, and maintain hope. It is a subtle form of cognitive resilience, helping us navigate life's ups and downs without being overwhelmed by the weight of every negative event. It also explains why nostalgia often feels sweet. We tend to remember positive experiences more vividly, while the negative aspects of the past are softened, creating an overall more favorable perception of our personal history. Awareness of the fading effect bias can be empowering. By recognizing that our minds naturally diminish the emotional impact of negative experiences, we can approach past failures or painful events with more objectivity and less self-criticism. At the same time, we can consciously savor and reinforce positive experiences, knowing that their emotional impact is likely to remain strong and influential in guiding future behavior. In essence, the fading effect bias is a psychological trick that subtly shapes our emotional memory, helping us prioritize well-being, maintain resilience, and focus on positive experiences. It explains why time can heal emotional wounds, why we often remember life's joys more than its hardships, and why humans are capable of moving forward even after setbacks. By understanding this bias, we gain insight into our own emotional processing, learning, and growth, and can use this knowledge to enhance our mental health, relationships, and daily experiences. It's a powerful reminder that the mind isn't just a recorder of events. It's an active participant in shaping how we feel. The spotlight effect. Have you ever walked into a room, made a small mistake, and suddenly felt like everyone noticed, judged, or was talking about it? Maybe you spilled a drink, stumbled over your words, or wore an outfit that felt slightly off, and you imagined that all eyes were on you. That feeling is not just anxiety. It's a real psychological phenomenon called the spotlight effect, and it's one of those fascinating tricks our minds play that makes us think we're far more noticeable than we really are. The spotlight effect is the tendency to overestimate the degree to which others are paying attention to our actions, appearance, or mistakes. In other words, we feel like we're in the center of a mental spotlight, while in reality, people are usually far less focused on us than we imagine. This effect was first studied by social psychologists Thomas Gilovich, Victoria Medvec, and Kenneth Savitsky in the 1990s. In classic experiments, participants were asked to wear embarrassing t-shirts and estimate how many people would notice. The results were consistent. Participants thought a far higher percentage of people noticed the t-shirt than actually did. This demonstrated that humans routinely overestimate the attention others pay to their behavior, which can influence social anxiety, self-consciousness, and even decision-making. The spotlight effect occurs because of a combination of egocentrism and self-focused attention. We are constantly aware of our own thoughts, feelings, and actions, so it's natural to assume that others are paying the same level of attention. But most people are focused on themselves, their own concerns, insecurities, and experiences, so they actually notice far less than we think. The effect has profound implications for everyday life, from social interactions to performance situations. For example, public speaking anxiety often stems from the spotlight effect. We assume that every stumble, pause, or minor mistake will be noticed and remembered, when in reality, the audience is far less attentive than we imagine. Similarly, in social interactions, fear of embarrassment or judgment is often exaggerated because we believe our mistakes are more visible than they really are. Understanding the spotlight effect can be liberating. By realizing that others are not constantly scrutinizing us, we can reduce unnecessary stress, increase confidence, and approach social situations with greater ease. It allows us to act authentically, take social risks, and speak up without the paralyzing fear of constant observation. The spotlight effect also interacts with other cognitive biases, like the illusion of transparency, the tendency to overestimate how well others can detect our internal states. Together, these biases can create a heightened sense of exposure, but both are based on the same principle. Our internal focus distorts our perception of others' attention and awareness. Interestingly, the spotlight effect also influences behavior in subtle ways. For example, we might overcompensate for perceived mistakes, over-apologize, or engage in excessive self-monitoring. These behaviors can make us more self-conscious, reinforcing the illusion that everyone is watching, when in reality they're often preoccupied with their own concerns. In professional and academic contexts, awareness of the spotlight effect can improve performance and reduce stress. Knowing that minor errors or missteps are unlikely to be noticed by most people allows us to take risks, experiment, and engage more fully in tasks without being paralyzed by fear of judgment. In social relationships, the effect can also help us navigate interactions more effectively. By realizing that friends, peers, and colleagues are not constantly evaluating every action, we can communicate more openly, focus on genuine connection, and avoid unnecessary worry about minor social faux pas. The spotlight effect has evolutionary roots as well. Being attuned to how others perceive us was likely adaptive in social groups, helping early humans navigate social hierarchies, avoid conflict, and build alliances. However, in modern life, this heightened self-focus can exaggerate our sense of visibility, creating stress in situations where social scrutiny is actually minimal. One interesting application of the spotlight effect is in creative or performance fields. Artists, writers, speakers, and performers often experience heightened self-consciousness, assuming audiences notice every flaw. By understanding that the spotlight effect is skewing perception, they can focus on the quality of their work rather than the imagined judgment of others, leading to greater confidence and more authentic expression. On a deeper psychological level, the spotlight effect highlights the human tendency towards self-centered perception. We are wired to monitor ourselves constantly, but our brains don't accurately account for the fact that others are similarly focused on their own experiences. This cognitive mismatch creates the illusion of constant observation, but recognizing it allows us to step back, reframe our self-consciousness, and act with more freedom. In essence, the spotlight effect is a subtle but powerful psychological trick that explains why we often feel more exposed, scrutinized, or judged than we really are. It shows how our internal focus distorts our perception of others' attention and highlights the importance of perspective in social interactions. By being aware of this effect, we can reduce unnecessary anxiety, increase confidence, and engage more fully with the world around us. It reminds us that most people are too busy with their own thoughts to pay as much attention to us as we imagine. And realizing this can be incredibly freeing, allowing us to live more authentically, take risks, and focus. The Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, frequency illusion. Have you ever learned about something new, a word, a concept, or even a random fact, and then suddenly it feels like it's everywhere? You hear it in conversations, see it on social media, or notice it in news articles, and it seems almost impossible that you hadn't noticed it before. That's not a coincidence or magic. It's a well-documented psychological phenomenon called the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, also known as the frequency illusion, and it's one of the most fascinating tricks your brain plays on you. Essentially, once you become aware of something new, your mind starts noticing it more frequently, creating the illusion that its prevalence has suddenly skyrocketed. The phenomenon works through a combination of selective attention and confirmation bias. First, selective attention means that your brain begins to pay more attention to stimuli that are relevant or newly significant to you. Before you learned about a new word or idea, your brain filtered it out as unimportant. Once it's on your radar, however, it jumps out everywhere because your brain now considers it relevant. Confirmation bias then reinforces the illusion. You notice instances that confirm the new frequency, while ignoring or forgetting all the times it appeared before. This creates the compelling feeling that the world has suddenly become filled with this new thing, when in reality it was always there, you just weren't paying attention. The Baader-Meinhof phenomenon is surprisingly common in everyday life. For example, you might learn a new car model and suddenly see it on the street every day. Or you might hear about a medical condition, and then it seems like everyone around you is talking about it. Social media and digital environments amplify this effect because algorithms prioritize content that is relevant to your interests, making newly noticed ideas, trends, or topics appear even more frequently. Psychologists have studied the Meinhof phenomenon to better understand attention, memory, and perception. One interesting aspect is how the phenomenon interacts with our sense of reality and probability. We often overestimate how common or significant something is based on how frequently we notice it, which can lead to biased judgments or misperceptions about the world. For instance, hearing about rare events repeatedly in the news can make them feel more common or threatening than they really are, a cognitive bias closely related to the availability heuristic. The phenomenon also has intriguing implications for learning and memory. When we are newly exposed to a concept, our heightened attention to it makes it more likely to stick in our memory. This means that noticing something frequently after first learning about it isn't just an illusion. It also reinforces learning and retention, making it a subtle but effective mechanism for knowledge acquisition. In marketing, the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon is often exploited strategically. Advertisers know that once consumers become aware of a brand, product, or message, they are more likely to notice it repeatedly in different contexts, creating the impression of ubiquity and importance. This can enhance brand recognition and perceived popularity, leveraging the natural biases of human attention and perception. Socially and psychologically, the phenomenon affects how we perceive trends, opinions, and behaviors. We might feel like a particular style, phrase, or idea has taken over because we are suddenly noticing it more often, when in fact it has been present all along. This can influence social behavior, conformity, and even the spread of cultural phenomena. Interestingly, the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon also interacts with curiosity and motivation. When we notice something repeatedly, we often seek to learn more about it, which further increases our exposure and reinforces the perception of frequency. This creates a feedback loop. Awareness leads to noticing leads to learning, and learning reinforces awareness. Understanding the frequency illusion can be empowering because it helps us recognize that our perception of prevalence is often skewed by cognitive biases rather than objective reality. By being aware of selective attention and confirmation bias, we can better evaluate patterns, probabilities, and trends without being misled by the illusion of sudden ubiquity. On a deeper level, the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon highlights the active role our brains play in shaping perception. We don't passively absorb reality. We filter, prioritize, and interpret information based on what is relevant, new, or significant. This selective processing allows us to navigate complex environments efficiently, but also tricks us into believing that newly noticed things are suddenly everywhere. In essence, the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon is a subtle psychological trick that demonstrates how human perception is influenced by attention, memory, and cognitive biases. It explains why new ideas or information can feel omnipresent, why trends seem to explode suddenly, and why our perception of reality is often shaped more by what we notice than by objective frequency. By understanding this phenomenon, we can become more mindful of how our attention works, avoid being misled by illusions of prevalence, and better navigate the flow of information in everyday life. It's a perfect example of how our brains, while incredibly efficient, sometimes play tricks on us in ways that feel mysterious, even magical, until we understand the science behind them.